I'm thrilled to be here. I'm Yumna, by the way. My name was slightly mispronounced, so Yumna Hari Singh. Thrilled to be here. I think Bangalore Poetry Festival year on year has become such a tradition, such a treasure. And I'm here with two fantastic people, Karthik and Abhivyakti, who are creative people in their own right. Karthik writes, Abhivyakti does poetry. She's published her own collection. And they're also commissioning editor at Hatchet India and executive editor at Penguin Random House. So lots of important connections on the stage for all of you looking to publish your work with the established houses. So I'm going to jump straight into it, and the format is going to be, we only have 30 minutes. I know lots of you have questions. I'd like to open the floor to as many questions as we can, so we're going to be quick. And so anyone who has a question, pop into your mind right now, write it down on your phone, write it down on your notepad, and if you get a chance to ask it, be really succinct, okay? So we're also going to try and be succinct. On that note, could we start with talking about the poetry landscape in India today as far as publishing is concerned? Should we start with you, Abhivyakti?
Sure. Can you hear me all right? So I think India has always been a non-fiction-led market, so fiction and poetry to some degree have suffered, but still poetry has a segment as well. So if we are to go by the forecast for 2024, compared to 2023, there's at least a 20% jump, which is quite nice. I think it's quite a good number for a segment that's perceived as niche and has like a close set of people who enjoy it. I think it's relatively harder to launch an English language debut poet in the climate that we have, because it's such a low bibliodiversity in our country that people aren't open to newer voices at the get-go. They take their time to warm up to it, and the classics sort of become a mainstay. So even if we are selling poetry collections by the numbers, those will mostly be classics, populated by then regional poetry, which does well. And then you come to English language debut collections and debut poets. So relatively harder to launch debut poets. However, I think given the enthusiasm the segment has been seeing, I'm hopeful, we are optimistic. And as publishers, then you do your part in trying to bring that out. So for example, we published the wonderful Rochelle Potka this year. We do, I think poetry cannot populate an editor's list alone, but you do take your chances with the voices that just, hit your heart and demand your attention and would be a valuable addition to your list. So I think Rochelle is one such example. And many more, as we go along.
Okay. I'm actually going to, Karthik, ask you a little bit further, same question, but a little bit further, if you have anything to add. Is, you have brought out debut poets, and you've also, brought out bilingual editions. And I think one thing about poetry in India is, I think the vernacular market is so strong. There's always a demand. There's always poetry flying off the shelves. And I think that there is an accessibility issue where I, for one, would love to read vernacular poets, but don't have access because of a language barrier. And I think something like bilingual collections, allow you to access the treasures that already exist around us. So could you talk a little bit about that as a market, that we could possibly even explore further?
I mean, ideally, it would be in the fitness of things to publish more and more bilingual editions, right? But having said that, you actually need editors who are fairly good with 2 or more languages to be able to actually work through those editions, right? So, Hindi and English is a possibility. The number of editors who can do that are quite a few. But certain languages, let's say Gujarati and English, Marathi and English, the number of editors who can competently handle both languages are fewer. And that's one of the bigger challenges, right? English per se is perhaps the easiest. To be able to publish a bilingual edition and to find that many editors who are good with 2, 3, 4 languages is a big ask.
But in today's gig economy, wouldn't it be a good idea to have a whole bunch of consultant editors that you trust, who you can then begin to outsource work to, and then therefore also drive more careers in publishing?
So consultant editors largely do, copy editing work, proofreading work, right? There are consulting editors doing some amount of commissioning, but I think the poetry consulting editor is not yet a phenomenon here. I think given the amount of poetry that mainstream publishers publish, I don't think the poetry commissioning editor, who's going to be an outsider, is yet something that publishing house will perhaps be very comfortable with in the near future, perhaps in the longer run. That is a possibility.
So I think everybody who writes poetry and dreams of publishing a collection wants to publish with one of the big names, that you both, for example, represent. But in some cases, it feels like you're constantly waiting to be found, right? And I know that you have also gone down the self-publishing route. So maybe you could share a little bit of your experience of the pros and cons of self-publishing versus publishing your first book with an established publishing house.
So I don't have a book with one of the big fives yet. And the one that I do have out there, I wish I could slap the book out of my 22-year-old self and not put it out there. Because I think I was too young to be doing something like that. Poetry demands some sort of grace and maturity and dignity that comes with time, comes with experiences. And I wasn't ready, and it shouldn't be putting out what I did put out. However, having said that, I think I do support self-publishing, even being in traditional publishing, only because I think it's such a democratic platform that if you have a voice and you feel it hasn't been recognized enough, then of course, by all means, go there, put your work out, find your readers. For me, the process was rather seamless. First of all, I was so green that I could not have counter opinions to anything the folks at the publisher said to me or asked me of. So I just went by what they told me, and it was a good experience, I'd say. No major roadblocks. What is the differentiator that I think I now understand is that traditional publishers have a more robust distribution channels. So whatever number of books or whatever number of copies may be there in the first print run, it reaches more stores, more people, it's pressed in more hands. I think that is where I think self-publishing sort of doesn't have that so much of a say, I'd say. Secondly, I think also there's some degree of prestige that comes with traditional publishing, some sort of stature that is afforded to you, because editors generally tend to be so picky because they have to meet their revenue targets, they have to see what the ROIs are. And so whatever you do then bring on board is then quality, something that has been vetted for, the editor has pleaded the case for the book with the sales team, with the marketing team, with the production team, and everybody's in on it. So I think that is when okay, so this is the voice that we are going to invest in. This is the person that, we are going to launch. And it, particularly, I think, with poetry, we tend to be slightly cautious is because I think it's such a beautiful form and you cannot be frivolous about it. That, if you just need one poetry title on your list, you'll just take somebody. I think you have to be way more intentional in what you're bringing to the table to the readers. So I think those are like the basic differences I see. But all in all, I say if you have a book and you think that it hasn't been appreciated by, say, the big 5 publishers, by all means, I think if you know a self-publisher who could help you get that work out, please do.
No, I mean, any publisher will tell you publishing the book is 50% of the journey. The remaining 50% is marketing, publicity, etc. But in self-publishing, I would say it's 25%. Right? When you publish a book, when you self-publish a book, it's 25%. 75% of the work you still have to do, right? Because the other 25% would have been the marketing and the salespeople of the company doing various things. No one's going to do that for you. You have to do that yourself. So the road is long and hard. So you should be aware of that when you self-publish. You should be willing to put in the miles. If you're not, then you are perhaps in for a lot of disappointment more than anything else in terms of being noticed.
Okay, so I'm sure there are many people who want to be published by one of your houses. What would be your advice to them? And not one piece of advice, ideally 3 pieces of advice.
See, my biggest grouse is not so much about poets, right? The biggest problem with publishing poetry is it's difficult for poetry to get noticed. And why is that happening? For instance, even though it is perhaps difficult for a debut novelist to get noticed, there is one way. There are awards, right? Getting a novel onto an award long list or a short list is a possibility. So you invest in a debut novelist, thinking maybe if he or she makes it to an award long list or short list, that is one way of they're getting noticed. What are the avenues for poetry, for instance? There is no poetry award in India, right? So that not being there, how does one then establish this debut poet or a poet who is, publishing his or her second collection or something like that? That is the thing, right? So the ecosystem needs to evolve to support the poet. The poets are doing what they can in terms of writing, publicizing, and so on. But I think the ecosystem is not doing enough to support the poet. That is one thing I would definitely say.
I think if you're a poet and if you're a new poet particularly, try to get your work in respectable or reputable lit mags, just to have your work out there, get some remarks if the editor on the other end has the time and has some opinions on the work that you've done. Try to do that because it looks good in your bio. I would say it's certainly impressive for an editor or a publisher to see that the poet has done the work. They have tried putting their work out. Secondly, I think festivals like these try to be around people who understand the passion and the whys and hows of what you do. And you make great connections, you meet the right people, you're embroiled in the right ecosystem, and that helps. And third advice, since you asked for three, I think be a good literary citizen. I mean, support fellow poets, support their work, speak out, be loud, share with your friends. And I think poetry community is so much more closely knit if I compare it to, say, the novelist or the fiction community. I think take advantage of that and just be a good literary citizen. I think that also helps.
And I have one thought which I actually want to put out there. I mean, this has been done in India and it's been done abroad a lot in the past. Could perhaps 2 poets or 3 poets come together to publish 1 volume, right? Is that a possibility even that poets would want to consider? Simply because then there are 3 people who are going to talk about the same book, and that might actually help. That is perhaps one way of breaking new ground in terms of publishing debut poetry or a second collection or something like that. That is perhaps one thing that hasn't been done in a while. It's been done in the past. There are historical precedents, but it hasn't been done in the recent past. Perhaps that's one way.
I think the other thing that has happened that takes that idea much further is, of course, to be anthologized. But I think that's a completely separate sort of category than what you're talking about.
A poet, an anthology will give 5 pages to a poet, 6 pages to a poet, whereas 2 or 3 poets in a single volume will still give, say, 40, 50 pages to a poet. So in terms of just putting the work of the poet out there, I'd prefer, anthologies are fine. Anthologies are important, and we've published anthologies at Penguin, and others have published anthologies as well. But this is, this mini anthology of sorts, if that's what you could call it. That is perhaps something to think about.
That's a great idea. It's not one I've thought of. Okay, quick show of hands. Does anybody have any questions? If you don't, I'm going to continue to monopolize their attention. 1 question I can see. Okay, anybody else? Anybody else? The lights are in my eyes. Are there more? 2, 3. Okay, all right. So I'm going to actually open the floor to questions. Do you have a mic on the floor that someone can take around, or should we ask people to come up and ask their question here? Any idea? Room people? No? Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand you my mic, and I'm going to scavenge this mic. And may I request whoever's asking a question to be really concise? Yes, I can hear somebody. There's a mic coming? Okay, thank you. There's a mic coming. Okay, please be really concise. And if someone's already asked the question, please don't ask the question again. Thank you so much.
The facility of publishing Kannada poem books.
Okay,
I want Kannada Ghazal books I want to publish.
So at Penguin, we publish largely Hindi and English, right?
No.
We have begun publishing in the regional languages, right? It's a project that is just taking off. I won't be able to answer this question clearly for at least the next couple of years before this project takes off, much better.
Sir, when it is
Okay,
Bangalore Poetry Festival, you want answer for Bangalore Kannada Poetry Festival.
I've answered your question as best as I can.
Okay, so I think what we're going to do is we're going to try and keep conversations to an absolute minimum, by which I'm politely saying no conversations. Okay, so I can see, yes, there we go. 1 question there. And then a few rows behind after that. Thank you.
So my question is, if I want to work on an anthology rather than publish my own poetry. So if I'm looking at anthology, what is the way to go? First, do you get probably to permission from the editor and publisher, or do you go around investing time in getting the poems from all of the people involved?
I mean, I would say an anthology, to be able to edit an anthology, you have to be a fairly senior and established poet yourself. Otherwise, a mainstream publisher will just wonder about the credibility of the person putting together his anthology. So, I mean, that is typically what will come up for discussion. So, unless you are someone who has published, who has some stature in the poetry world, I would discourage you from doing the groundwork for an anthology simply because it's a lot of work and it might not yield any results at the end.
I think if you want your piece included in an anthology, just cold query. I mean, it doesn't hurt to try. If you know somebody in the publishing house, or if you have heard that an editor out there is putting a volume together, just cold query. Ask if you can pitch your piece to them. And if they are game, then, fantastic. And if not, then, you try again. So I think cold querying helps a lot, and it's so undervalued, I cannot tell you. I think sometimes people just take chances if they are in the right space, if their list demands it, or if it's the right time. So take your shot, I think.
My question is, I usually find that the writers who are good at writing lack altogether the skills needed for marketing and networking. Then how do we go about publishing? How to make necessary connections?
No, I mean, you're here at a poetry festival. That is a good thing. There are writers and poets here whom you can talk to, whom you can ask, whom you can, inquire from as to how they do some of the more murkier aspects of publishing, which is, marketing and sales and publicity and so on. That would be one way to start. I think it's also in the mind, right? A writer feels perhaps, or some writers feel perhaps, it is beneath them to market, or it is beneath them to publicize, their own book. And perhaps it's not a bad idea to wonder why we think like that and get over that, right? I mean, talking about your own book, telling people about your own book is not a bad thing. It's a very, very good thing. I think if we start to think on those lines, that is perhaps the first step. And the other step would be to talk to other writers who I'm all sure have done something to publicize their books, right? And find out what they've done and how they've done it.
And should I? Yeah. So I think that's an excellent point. And going off of that, I'd just say, every publisher would have a marketing and publicity setup that would help, help the work be out there. However, it also befalls the poet or the author to do their part. I'd say do as much as your mental health allows, as much as you think you can put your work out there, as much as you can put yourself out there. And eventually the work speaks for itself. If the word of mouth carries through, it does. And we've seen that happen. So trust your work a little bit and speak about it confidently if you meet the right people. I think that's about it.
Yeah, hi. My name's Anil. My son Vikram is a poet. He had presented earlier. He hasn't published any of his work. What would you say is publishing 101? What's the process? He's written about 60 poems. Do we just send over the manuscript to you? Because there has some context as well in his particular case.
No, see, I would say do two things. Yes, put together a manuscript, yes. But also, send out your poems to journals, magazines, one or two poems that can be published here and there. That's also something you should do parallelly. It's an important part of the whole process, publishing in magazines, publishing in, literary journals and so on. So I would suggest do both.
So we just send out a manuscript that works as well?
That works, yes. I mean, someone is bound to read your manuscript and give you feedback. But also do this other thing where, you'd want to publish one or two or three poems in a journal.
Timelines? Does it happen?
Timelines for what?
Once you send a manuscript, how long does it take to get
It won't take very long. It'll probably take 2 or 3 months to get back to you with a decision, right? The publishing process might take much longer.
Yeah, hi, I'm Aishwarya. This is a little bit of a peculiar question. But so as you said earlier, the ecosystem Sure. Okay. So as you said earlier, the ecosystem is not very conducive for publishing poets as much as they should be. Is it feasible to publish poems as visual media instead of print media, since it opens up the ecosystem and the market for watchers gets included in the market of readers as well? So do you think it's a future market that we can sort of tap into?
Can I just ask a clarification question? You're talking about something like performance poetry where it's audio visual, or you're talking about social media sharing of poetry? What exactly are you saying?
No, it can be performance of poetry. It can be voiceover of poetry in a cinematographic way. I have seen that play very well recently. So, yeah.
I think whatever medium benefits your work best, definitely go for that. I think print medium affords a certain dignity since there are no take-backs. So once it's out there, it's out there. Video you can delete, pull back, I assume, wherever, in whichever platform you're putting out. And print media, books specifically, I'd say are more firm. So that's like a record. It's noted now. And that matters, that makes a difference to, to your career, to your later oeuvre, or to how you view yourself as an artist. So definitely that. But speaking of performance poetry and poetry in general, I think it's such a form that lends itself to a lot more than just print, which is great, which is fantastic. I think do leverage that if your work allows for it. Not every sort of a poem lends itself to performance poetry. But if yours does, I think why not take it there? There have been so many successful poets who've done that, especially in the West. So I think they are good, good artists to take cues from.
And the visual medium of poetry that you're saying is already happening, in films. So that's what you're actually going to be competing against. So remember that as well. We can't hear you.
Can someone turn the mic on? Try again.
Okay. My sort of question, I don't think I was clear enough, but it was more of kind of imagine a Netflix series, but of poems expressed in a very cinematographic way with a voiceover of the poet, etc. So it's blending performance poetry into media, and I think that's...
Okay, so I think that's partly answered with
Yeah,
it being
exactly.
films. So I
Yeah.
think, but thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? Any other questions? Okay, we've got 5 minutes, which means I get to monopolize them. If someone's got a burning question, you can jump up and down or catch the eye of the people who have mics, because we want to accommodate as many of you as we can. Acha, so just to take off from that, we have, because I really like the question, I agree with you, it's competition, film, lyrics and music, which is just another form of poetry as far as I'm concerned. But like you have these stand-up shows on Netflix. I mean, why not have poetry on Netflix as long as you've got people who are killing it, when they're performing? So what about that?
So evangelize it, start watching it on Netflix. I'm sure 100 shows will get commissioned, right? If you can do that, why not? Now, how many stand-up shows were there, say, 10 years ago on anywhere, right? Clearly, they are
Growing.
being commissioned because people are watching them. So
Correct.
watch such programs and Netflix or whoever will commission it. It's as
So
simple
there you
as
go.
that.
Start a platform. Poetry. Anything else? Any last thoughts?
I mean, my only thought I would leave everyone with is when you talk to people, you're bound to get a very pessimistic worldview. Oh, nobody's interested in poetry. Poetry doesn't. No one publishes poetry. I don't think that's true, right? People are interested in poetry. People are reading poetry. Mainstream publishers are also interested in poetry. But the thing is, mainstream publishing, fortunately or unfortunately, is also a business, right? So the commercial angle will come into it. And when commercial questions are asked, how much will this sell, right? How much can we price it at? That's when the difficulties creep in, right? So if poetry begins to sell, right, believe me, everyone will be standing in line in front of poets' houses saying, please give us your next manuscript. So don't believe the naysayers. Don't believe the prophets of doom and gloom. I would say think positive, evangelize poems, evangelize poetry, grow the market, and all of us will be standing in line.
Basically, he's saying buy lots of poetry. So anybody who hasn't bought poetry here, go out and buy, grow the market, and also market your own book. So hang on.
I'd say, again, be a good literary citizen. That helps a lot. That helps you eventually if you want to be a poet. That helps the people who are already out there doing, laying the groundwork. So just support the work, as he said. Buy books, support the poets, show up to their readings, show up to their book launches, make that little effort. It counts a lot and goes a long way. And it pays back also, eventually when it's your turn. So I think, just, be a good person, be a good literary citizen, and it just comes back to you in one way or another. I'd also say that keep yourself attuned to good podcasts, people, where they're having conversations that are particularly meaningful for you. Expose yourself to the right kind of culture, right kind of visual medium, right kind of books, and that helps, and eventually all comes back to you in the form of a book or a work or a poetry or verse. So it's just like a long overhaul, a long view of how you can get the work done. But it's a slow-moving process, but eventually, it all comes back.
So thank you all very much. You've been a great audience. Thank you to Bangalore Poetry Festival. Thank you both. You've been delightful and amazing, as I would expect you to be. And also for all of those who run into hard walls, I have some of my favorite poets who are now represented by the biggest houses, self-published their first poetry collection. So, if you need to do that, go ahead and do that too. All the best. Thank you.